I mentioned earlier about government positions being replaced by what is essentially foreign paid agents, all with the now ever so frequent term born in or born to or both. Which is also multicultural. And remember, multicultural is all about mixing the races. And yet, where is the equal share for the white race in other countries? There is none. Black people largely run black countries. Asians run Asian countries. Hispanics run Hispanic countries. But the whites are not allowed to run their own country, it seems. And we have to diversify with other races, with the top positions all going to one group, the Jewish. And I repeat again, I am not against multiculturalism. What I'm highlighting is a program. But with Biden under threat and someone to push him out, and now Boris Johnson under severe threat to resign, one suspects there is something afoot here. And not that I personally care for either of them or their policies, or in most cases the lack of them, particularly in reference to the people. But a pattern is forming and I start to see the moves or movers. So Boris is being called out to resign for having a party, not a political party, a general party, a gathering, when he and his government told the public to be in strict lockdown in May. Not of last year, but 2020. So the government and Boris all had a nice party, no social distance and no masks, etc., when everyone else was in lockdown. But why bring it up now? Why not then? Because all the journalists knew about it. So why after 20 months is it now highlighted? Does that make sense? It's a program then, isn't it? And with Kushner waiting in the wings in America, and don't think it'll just be for the Republican Party either. Who is gaining if Johnson is forced to resign? So let's go off track a bit, shall we? But it'll all tie in at the end. In 2009, the pedophile Jimmy Savile was interviewed under caution by police in Surrey and Sussex. And subsequently, the police referred 4 cases to the CPS, Crown Prosecution Services, alleging that Savile had raped at least 3 learning disability girls under the age of 16. And the CPS, after receiving the files from the police, refused to prosecute Savile and dropped the claim, citing insufficient evidence. They weren't the only ones that dropped it, so did Scotland Yard. But after Savile's death, and despite multiple attempts at high-level cover-ups, we now know that he abused at least 500 known victims over a 4-decade period. So why is this important? Because of the man in charge of the CPS at that time. The man who decided there was insufficient evidence to charge Savile is now the leader of the UK Labour Party, which is the opposition to the Tory Conservative Johnson Party. Now, the UK Justice Secretary, who is leading the charge to have Boris resign, his name is Dominic Raab. So if Johnson resigns and a new election is called, in steps the man who let the pedophiles off despite overwhelming evidence. So who is this guy? Keir Starmer. Oh, did I not tell you? Mr. Starmer is born to Jewish parents. I've forgotten something else. Did I not tell you that Dominic Raab is also born to Jewish parents? So now you know, and now you see. And some people will ask, why mention the Jewish or Israelis so much? And it's a valid point. The answer is, wherever you mention corruption, rogue programs, fraudulent activity, heinous abuse and crimes, it is they who are the common denominator in it all, as all the regular listeners can now see. But the real issue is why no one else is discussing it too much, not the fact that I do. And how can you be deemed awake and miss the giant elephant not only in the room, but the whole damn planet? Exposé. We're going to New Zealand. Pull some bits up about them before we go into a slightly longer last piece. So New Zealand is an island state next to Australia, which has become a preferred boat hole for the ultra-rich. And one of the discussions as far back as 2011 was that the elites wanted to all move to New Zealand and remove the native population, and they would all live on the islands. And this was rejected, and the petulant clowns decided to use the earthquake pulse weapon, and Christchurch was severely damaged and 185 people were killed. 1 month later, the deep state clowns also did another false flag event on Japan. But in its position in the far southern hemisphere, it renders it less vulnerable to, for example, and this was one of their plans, radioactive pollution released in the northern hemisphere. That's why they were going there. Which means, and I know they were planning a northern hemisphere nuclear war. It got stopped. But in 2020, at the start of the COVID-19 scandemic, the PM with the testicles, Jacinda Ardern, effectively sealed the country off from the rest of the world after aggressively employing contact tracing and lockdowns. And it soon followed a policy of mandatory vaccinations and removal of legal protection for unvaccinated, including the right to punitive measures under the fig leaf of health directives to bulldoze their houses and also kill their pets. Yes, that's what's been going on. A little bit of history about New Zealand. Norman Kirk, who was a New Zealand Prime Minister in the early 1970s, died suddenly after moving against the interests of the US deep state. And in 1973, he strongly opposed the French nuclear tests in the Pacific, and he promoted racial equality at home and abroad, and his government prevented the South African rugby team from touring New Zealand during 1973 in a protest against apartheid. Now, immediately after his election as the Prime Minister, Kirk also withdrew all New Zealand troops from Vietnam, which ended that nation's 8-year involvement in the Vietnam War. And the Kirk government also abolished compulsory military training, known as conscription in New Zealand. He was also highly critical of US foreign policy, speaking before the United Nations of the US involvement in the coup d'etat in Chile in 1973. Kirk also had a reputation as a most formidable debater of his time, and once famously said, "There are 4 things that matter to people: They have to have somewhere to live, they have to have food to eat, they have to have clothing to wear, and they have to have something to hope for. That was not the type of leader the control system wanted, it seems, and a year later he was dead. Now, it was proposed that a royal commission should be set up to investigate said rumours that he'd been killed. Guess who by? Perhaps it was said with contact poison by the CIA. Well, I never. Policies in New Zealand. They've been lying about mass surveillance. In 2013, the Prime Minister John Key promised expressly that if the Government Communications Security Bureau were found to have conducted mass surveillance, he would later resign, together with the GCSB chief Ian Fletcher. Now, in 2015, following revelations by Edward Snowden, Nikki Hager proved that the GCSB does carry out such surveillance. And the former GCSB chief, Bruce Ferguson, admitted as much, and yet John Key ignored his vow and did not resign. Terrorism. In 2002, New Zealand introduced the Terrorism Suppression Act, TSA, which remained unused until 2019, just when the COVID scam was being introduced to a comatose public. So the 2019 Terrorism Suppression Bill, which is control orders, allowed the New Zealand government to decide on the balance of probabilities that someone is a terrorist, without a need to show any evidence. And as Susie Dawson summarised, it then allows them to control your work, your finances, your movements, net access, internet access, and prevent you telling people it's happening. Water fluoridation. In 2017, the New Zealand government was aiming to introduce laws to expand it, not end it. Citizenship. Peter Thiel, the PayPal billionaire, connected with Trump, connected with the Hebrew Anunnaki, was granted New Zealand citizenship after making a donation to the Christchurch earthquake appeal, sparking a passport for sale row. Well, these people were involved in creating the earthquake, and then they're given fake donations to get what they want. Drug adverts. As of December 2017, New Zealand was the only country apart from the United States that allowed prescription drug companies to advertise on television. Internet censorship. New Zealand ramped up its censorship greatly in 2019 and again in 2020, claiming that state agencies had the right to censor or remove any online content that they deemed extremist, terrorist, or otherwise objectionable. So in other words, truth. Because these people, truth is objectionable because they're too weak to handle it. And that applies to the sleepers as well. They're pathetically weak people who cannot handle the truth. And this is what the Terrorism Suppression Act was enacted for. COVID-19 Public Health Response Vaccinations Order 2021. And in November last year, New Zealand passed the COVID-19 Public Health Response Vaccinations Order. And the legislation takes away all legal rights for an unvaccinated or insufficiently vaccinated persons, allowing for 1. The lockdown of the unvaxxed or sufficiently unvaxxed people. 2. The ability to restrict travel within the country to unvaxxed or sufficiently unvaccinated, or a person that doesn't want a booster shot. 3. Withhold certification from those who do not get required boosters or subsequent combinations of vaccines as may be ordered at any time. 4. The ability to dictate the type and form of certification required for proof of vaccine status, digital or otherwise. 5. The ability to dictate what other information may be required for the renewal of the vaccine certificates and which information may be contained on such a certificate. 6. The period for which a vaccine certificate is valid can be changed at any time, and who it is that may be entitled or eligible to have these certificates. 7. The specification of mandates for entire job sectors. 8. The ordering of certain jobs to require regular mandatory testing and medical examination. 9. Enforcement officers to be able to demand certificates pretty much at any given time. 10. The appointment of enforcement officers that can be anybody they wish to appoint and not necessarily the police. 11. Enforcement officers to inspect and take copies of certificates to be verified at a later date before immediately returning such documentation. 12. The provision of an assessment tool for employees to use to determine who should be vaccine mandated. However, employers can totally disregard the assessment tool and mandate at whim. This is all in the law. 13. Legal. Listen closely to this one. Legal or other representatives of employees may be refused entry to workplaces. 14. Contact tracing information may be used against a person in order to enforce the act. That tells you what that contact tracing is all about. 15. Employees who have been dismissed for non-compliance of testing or vaccination but comply at the last minute may still be dismissed if the employer deems revoking the dismissal to be disruptive of their business. And then we have the amendments to the 1956 Health Act for New Zealand. 2021 amendments to the 1956 Health Act will allow punitive measures under the guise of health directives. 1. Hold unvaccinated in quarantine until such time as they have tested negative to infectious disease and have undergone preventative treatment. Vaccines. 2. Declare without proof or evidence a dwelling to be unsanitary, and in turn order the destruction of the property and the burning of associated materials. 3. Prohibit the keeping of animals and order the killing of animals. 4. Close any business not complying with the prescribed infection control measures. And 5. Forbid congregation, public or private. Events. The Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership Agreement. Now, New Zealand was a signatory to the Trans-Pacific Agreement, which is a treaty to abrogate state power by elevating the rights of corporations. corporations run the government. And a poll conducted in December 2012 showed that 64% of New Zealanders thought the trade agreements such as the TPP, which allow corporations to sue governments, should be rejected. They ignored it. Christchurch mass shootings. In March 2019, a shooting happened in Christchurch, which was live streamed onto the internet. And 4 people were arrested for doing that. Because the New Zealand establishment deemed that the video of the attack was objectionable. And so the New Zealand police warned that anyone sharing it would be liable for up to 10 years in jail. The classic Orwellian Stasi and National Zionist tactics of shameful control of the people, under the frankly ridiculous guise of they are improving your health and safety. The whole of New Zealand should have risen up against these complete psychopaths. And as only psychopaths and weak, fear-laden peoples would come up with these plans. And whilst people are distracted by divide and conquer, vaxxed and unvaxxed, your whole way of living and life is being stripped away from you with these psychopathic laws. This was never about being vaxxed, wearing masks and social distancing for your health. It's all about them creating a dystopian world for those few who are left, all under their control. And we the people have an obligation to stop that and create a better world for us all.